Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So this evening, I'm delighted to welcome, for a long overdue part 2, Aled Walters. So welcome to the podcast again, mate.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you very much for coming on. A lot's happened since last time we spoke.
I know. I'm actually quite nervous this time. I don't have Adam Sheehan next to me as well to control what I say and to make sense of everything. But what is it? Is it 3 years since we last spoke?
It'll be 3 years.
Yeah, about that now, yeah.
Be going on 3 years.
A lot's happened. That was probably the last time I had a haircut as well, by the looks of me.
Likewise. 2 beards. Another beard off like I had with Bryce Kavanagh a few weeks ago. But Aled, if anyone doesn't know who you are and didn't tune into part 1 with you and Adam, would you mind just giving us a bit of a background on yourself and maybe a bit of an update? Because I know I'm joking that not much has gone on the last 3 years, but it clearly has. So a bit of an update from you, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a Welshman. I know my accent doesn't really tell the story now. It's a bit mixed, but I've managed to accumulate a fair few air miles of my career, I suppose. So having started out in 2005 with the Scarlets, moved on to Taranaki, New Zealand, Brumbies in Australia, then back to Munster, where I spent about 6 years, and that's where I met the infamous Adam, the brains of the operation, Adam Sheehan. And then from there, I was lucky. I met and worked alongside Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber, who then went back to South Africa to lead the Springboks. And then, I was asked to go back with them at probably the best time, 2 years going into a World Cup. And I'm fortunate that went well. And then from there, back to the UK. So in June of last year, came back and now working as the head of physical performance with Leicester Tigers.
Nice, mate. You're one of the very few that I've had on World Cup winners. I think Nick Gill, Dawn Scott from women's football won it a couple of times. I think she's won it about 4 times. But so what was just going into the World Cup stuff, what was the expectation when you took the job 2 years out from a World Cup?
I think the immediate thing was to work in international rugby. That was the main thing, you know. Those kind of roles don't come up too often. And because I already had a good working relationship with the guys, I felt that it would be a really good move for myself and my wife anyway. So to experience something completely different as well. So the challenge was right then, they weren't doing particularly well at the time. There were some changes. There was a team in transition, a lot of players moving on, elder players, younger players coming through. So it was just a great chance. You know, I don't know I think South Africa was 7th in the world or something in the rankings at the time, but underperforming. You knew there was quality there and there was strength there. So the expectation was to go out and just try and do as well as we could, you know. But I had complete faith in the 2 coaches that they'd be able to turn things around and we'd be there or thereabouts, at least trying to contest, you know, in the latter stages of the tournament.
How important was it that you had worked with these 2 guys before?
Yeah, massively important. They really shaped my philosophy. I suppose they looked at things differently, did things in a different way. And having a working relationship with someone, knowing what they expect of you and what you can expect of them is it definitely makes life easier, doesn't it?
What did they think? How did they think differently to what you'd experienced before? What was it about them?
They made me realise, and this might sound ridiculous now, but they made me realise that the game at the end of the week is the main thing. You know, Rassie had the motto of with the box of let the main thing be the main thing, and it's so true, but it's easily overlooked, isn't it? If you're not doing everything in the week and every week consistently driven towards the performance at the weekend, well you're missing the point of it, aren't you? You know, when something becomes more important than the game, you're missing the whole purpose of what you're doing and how you're supporting the program. So that was actually one of the things. But what I really liked about them as well, they brought the toughness. They brought an expectation of what players should bring, what was non-negotiable, and just a different way of training, and something I'm sure we'll talk about again tonight. But more of an aggressive outlook on how much you can do and how much players can do. You know, I'm a big fan of Darren Burgess, and I remember him saying years ago, we don't know the potential of players. We don't know what they're capable of doing. And I remember him saying a story about going, I think it was with Port Adelaide at the time, going out to Dubai on the first day doing something like 10,000 meters of high-speed running. And that stuck with me. And I was like, yeah, without being reckless, we can push. So that's probably the thing that really kind of shaped me. And I liked that. I liked it was different, you know.
When you look back based on that, based on making the main thing, is there any examples of your time or certain practices that you did that you thought at that point that I'd got overexcited with the week, and obviously your little insular bit that wasn't adhering to that, the main thing being the main thing? Because I guess that's something that a lot of people can relate to, not only just in sport, but in everything. You got this goal, but you get so engrossed in these little things along the way with losing sight of that main thing.
Yeah, definitely. I remember vividly, they had only just arrived, I think, in the summer. It was the first pre-season, and going into the early stages of the season, having a massive blow-up with the defence coach Jacques, you know, and we became good friends after that because we both fought for our areas, but I fought poorly. And what I mean by that is I would have celebrated a training session if it had achieved the GPS metrics that were, you know, what we expected for that day. If the training session had gone to time, and it was a nice session. We'd almost babysat the players through a session and be like, brilliant, no one's injured, we've hit what we expected to hit, and everything's on time. Brilliant session. Did I actually take any heed of how good and how well prepared we were for the weekend? You know, were the players confident in the preparation? Were the coaches confident in the preparation? No, I was blinded to that because I thought, brilliant, it's done. You know, the acute chronic ratios all look beautiful. No one is at any kind of risk. We are good to go. And, you know, it was then the realization of being like, oh, shit, no, you know, we'll get thumped at the weekend. The numbers matter for nothing, you know. And so I'll take you to the other extreme of things. When we, in the 2019 Rugby Championship, we played Australia on one Saturday. The following Saturday, so we played Australia in Johannesburg on the Saturday. Then the following Saturday, we were playing New Zealand in Wellington. So with the travel implications and everything, I went across with a group of 14 players early because you have to give yourself the best chance to prepare, to even be in a position to beat New Zealand. Some of the players flew out on, it was on Monday. They flew on Sunday. They landed on Monday at 2:00. 7:00 that evening, we had a proper training session. There was nothing around, these guys can't do anything. We need to do hours of mobility. We need to get them into bed. We need to get them into the time zone. No, we need to get them ready for the game on Saturday because by doing all the right things, we're not going to be prepared to beat the All Blacks. So that's kind of the extremes that we went through. Was it reckless? Yeah, potentially. I had no idea what was going to happen. I was thinking, shit. Are we going to lose 4 or 5 guys here? But we didn't, you know, and that's the realization of it doesn't always have to be perfect, but what has to be there is the best preparation for the team to go and win at the weekend.
I mean, you said there you were a little bit nervous, but through your career, has that nervousness around that, and especially with this situation in South Africa, made you more comfortable with being nervous around them kind of situations of pushing players?
Yeah, definitely. The first week here at Leicester, we went hard and probably harder than I'd even kind of planned, you know. But what comes with that is you make a massive statement, don't you? And you also adapt accordingly. So if you feel like you have overshot it, well then, there's always tomorrow we can make a plan. If you lose guys, yeah, then it's been reckless and you've done it for your own ego. But going back to what Darren said a long time ago, you know, we don't know how far we can push guys. So we need to find that out, how far and how frequently can we do it, you know, safely.
I'd like to get into a little bit of a chat around your philosophy, Alad, if that's all right. And this may form a part of it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to physical preparation, can you communicate and I suppose simplify how you think about it as a whole?
Yeah, I suppose the question that I ask myself, okay, I'll go back first then. The philosophy broadly is being best prepared and least fatigued. So what I mean by that is what I've spoken about already. Are we as best prepared as we can be for this weekend and for every weekend? And because of the nature of the Premiership in England, and you throw Europe in on top of that, fatigue has to become a factor. We have to think about that. It's not a 7-game tournament. So how are we planning to be best prepared for this week and next? What are the implications of this week's training on next week? And realistically, how can we be the best prepared and least fatigued? Does that mean, and it probably does often, what's the minimum amount of work that we can do to be best prepared? And I know I've said best prepared about 12 times there now anyway, so you're going to have to edit, you're going to have to do your magic there, but that's really it, And when we talk, if we're taking unnecessary energy from the players, then we are doing them a complete disservice. And we might think that we're doing the right thing because we're developing a component of fitness or we're developing a physical characteristic. But what we're actually doing is detracting from their job for the weekend, and what they're paid to do is to perform. And you're almost playing with the futures of players and coaches at the same time. So that's really what I ask myself every week on a consistent basis. What are we doing? Are we getting best prepared here? And then the whole chat around transfer of training to playing and everything comes up. That's the challenge. Are we doing the necessary stuff? Are we doing the stuff we have to do, or are we doing the stuff that we need to do, or what's nice to do, So that's really
if I'd have asked you that 5-6 years ago, how would that have differed? Would it have differed?
Yeah, it probably would have. I would have probably gone on to you about, we need a real strength foundation. We need to work on this. We need to work on that. It would have been all the stuff that I thought was the most important. And I'm not for a second saying that it's not important, but how do you fit it in to the puzzle that is every week? How do you fit it in to the puzzle of a young player making his first start in a Premiership match? Does his week have to be tailored slightly differently? Does what he does in the gym that week, are we adding to the stress of the week, or are we actually taking something away to give him the best chance to perform? So it's all those kind of questions. So yeah, I'd say 5-6 years ago, I would have probably come up with a completely different answer. And maybe less airy-fairy than what I've just spoken about now.
Nice. So just going into your role at Leicester, what does that look like, and how does that differ from South Africa? Obviously a different environment, different country, international versus club, but from a day-to-day perspective, how does it differ? And how does it differ to your Munster role as well?
Oh, well, the immediate thing for South Africa, I was a one-man band, much like Gilly with New Zealand, So I was the only S&C coach with the box, so that meant that I had to prioritise, and that there was I learned a lot there from seeing what's important, but also what can I give my energy towards every week. So I had to be really clear myself, not just in terms of the program, but really clear in saying, I only have so much energy in the week. Where do I need to use that appropriately? So that's the first thing that's different. In Leicester, it's brilliant. We've got an excellent S&C department, medical department, sports science, nutrition. So it's not a luxury, but what I'm saying is that the challenge is for me now to lead that and lead it well and to oversee that. And that takes some getting used to, and I'm in my infancy of being able to do that, and I'm probably not doing it well enough currently, but it's something that we've got the people, we've got the right people in. We just need to make sure that we get a cohesive unit, or I'm leading a cohesive unit, and we get into what I spoke about earlier. So these thoughts can't just be in my head, and that's my challenge really anyway, is to be able to convey that. And then at Munster, I was leading the S&C department only, so that was different. There was a medical lead, and then me as the head of strength and conditioning, realistically anyway. So there was a smaller department to look after there.
It's interesting because I'm sure there'll be loads of coaches out there listening. Hopefully loads of coaches out there listening. But there'll be plenty who are in the same position, maybe not going on to win a World Cup, but one-man bands and trying to do all the things that you've just explained. Try to prioritize, try to tick the boxes, the main boxes, because there's only, so many hours in a day, so many days in a week. What was your process to go through that? Okay, where do I spend my time? What's going to get my mental energy, physical energy? Where's that going today?
I'd plenty of time to plan it. You plan for the best case scenario, don't you? But if I go directly to the 7 weeks in Japan during the World Cup, the last 3 weeks of the quarterfinal, semi, and the final, I probably gave very little energy in the gym. I was almost a spectator in the gym, just the guy walking around, just talking shit, and just trying to create a bit of an energy there without actually drilling and coaching hard. I didn't really coach much there. What I coached was the recovery in the last 3 weeks. So I'd even get out of the gym a little bit early to make sure that everything's done and set up for the recovery facilities, which we made sure was on the way out, so the guys had to walk past the recovery facilities. And that's where I spent my time. I more or less spent time planning the recovery. The luxury in Japan is you have these onsens, we had ice baths set up. We didn't have lasers and everything like that. We didn't have sauna suits and stuff, but we made the best of everything, and we used what we had at our disposal, and really working with the players to find the best solution for them to make sure that they were recovering from the physical demands, but they were conditioned to that at that stage, recovering from a mental demands, because as you can imagine, towards the latter stages, you're involved in media more, the pressure of selection gets higher, the pressure of making errors gets higher. So really tailoring and spending more time with those guys. So that's where the energy went to, if that makes sense. So going back to your original question, the process, it was roughly at the start of 2019, it was all the energy getting guys fit, getting guys, trying to get them tailored to play our best game, but also to negate the opposition, to getting them prepared for that. And then it just kind of, it fluctuated then, what I thought was important in an off week, what I thought was important in the game week. And that I suppose is part of the feel, isn't it? That's the artistry of what we do, So I had a plan and stuck to it relatively well, I think.
Let's dive into the recovery piece first, then we'll come back to the conditioning. So probably in reverse from what we spoke about. But that recovery bit, what, again, probably compared to the bigger nations, more well-resourced nations, I'm just assuming there, what were your go-tos when it came to recovery? And secondly, on another point, what we'd spoke about beforehand, which was an interesting one and a simple thing that you introduced throughout, was it the tournament, around alcohol? Or before the tournament? Would you mind just giving us an insight into that as well?
Yeah, so if I start with the alcohol, as we always should, I noticed in 2018, and this is not me talking ill of South Africans for a second, it's just part of the culture. It's the sociable side of how they do things. But I was actually surprised with, the team dinner, or on the Saturday after a game, you'd have a few beers, which I think is completely the right thing to do, unless it's a short turnaround. But Sunday there might be a couple, Monday night there might be a couple, and there'd be a little bit of alcohol throughout the week. So I worked closely with Jacques, who's now the head coach there, and this was early on in our planning. And I said, Jacques, we need to do something about the alcohol. Not to say that there's a drinking culture, but let's map it out better for the guys. So we actually came up with a calendar and looking at the schedule, and there were, so we highlighted the opportunities for the guys to drink. But with that, we went and had 3 levels of drinking. So level 1 was no drinking. That was dry. You're dry. Not even a touch of it. Level 2 was sociable drinking, and that was explained as the kind of drinking you do with your missus, you know, or when you're at home, you have a glass of wine or whatever it is. And then level 3, was shit the bed, and that was a time where you go, wow, this is your chance now. So if you don't use this chance, fair enough. But what happened with that is the senior players drove it, and they would ask, right then, what level is it now? What level are we working at? You know, but what that made was, you know, if you have certain nights out or certain nights where you get the level 3, the camaraderie, the togetherness of the group, because everyone wanted to make the most of it, you actually had everyone out at the same time, and it was brilliant, you know. So it wasn't like when something happens every weekend, it's take it or leave it, you know, there's always next weekend. When there were certain times throughout highlighted in the calendar, I was like, right then, now is the time to do it, and we do it properly, and it was brilliant, you know. But so we knew when it came to it, and obviously when things like this are at stake, but we had a 6-day turnaround going into the final. You know, we played the semi-final on the Sunday, final on the Saturday, and you know, there's drinks available in the change room afterwards with the sponsor, you know, leaving whatever in there. I'd say maybe 3 guys had 1 beer each, and that was it. So I think that was a successful element of how we recovered. Was okay, now it's important, now it's worthwhile that we don't go down that route. Obviously afterwards, after the final, jeepers, that was
level 7.
That was a fortnight of level 24. But yeah. So, but that was part of it, you know. And then the recovery plan itself, having discussions with players at the start when we got together in June, I think it was 2019. Really, what works for you? What works best for you? Okay, so if you need this, let me source it for you. And there was nothing outrageous, you know, and I'd say we're probably one of the least fancy in terms of recovery, but it was just basic stuff. Scheduling sleep, you know, into the program, into the schedule. So wherever possible, after lunch, there is an opportunity for you to go and have a nap. If you don't have a nap, no problem. It doesn't matter. But there's an opportunity there if you want it, particularly around camp times, you know. Always offered ice, always, because some guys, and I know there's conflicting evidence around ice and the effect it might have on strength, but if guys feel better from getting into the ice, or if they feel like they're doing something to promote their recovery by getting in the ice, I would rather they do it and not get absolutely everything out of the strength program, you know. So it was basic nutrition. We really went hard on nutrition. Really good nutrition around training. Everything always available. So really just hammered the basics, and that was probably the main thing. And like I mentioned, we had having those onsens, the hot onsens in Japan everywhere. They were brilliant. You know, you can't take your phone in there, and half the time it's something to make sure that you get to relax. And if you can't take your phone, you're typically going to sit there for half an hour, chat with your mate, and relax, aren't you? And that's great recovery, isn't it?
Just explain that for us. I've not been to Japan, Alad, so I don't know what that is. Give us a bit of an insight.
It's brilliant. So there's men's and women's onsen. So you go in.
Onsen? Is it onsen?
I think it's onsen. Jeez, I might
onsen.
be butchering it now with my Westphalian lingo, but yeah, it's like hot springs. They're really hot. Now you've got to deal with a lot of nakedness, and I have to say, the old Japanese boys, they're not shy as well. So there was a lot of nakedness going around there, but yeah, it's just hot springs. But it was there'd be, in some of the better ones, you'd have the cold baths and the hot baths and everything. But it turned into more of a social thing as well, where guys would find good onsens You know, they almost became onsen snobs. So I'm a big fan. If a player feels better and better recovered from using heat, or better recovered from using ice cold water, well then choose your weapon and go with it. Because if you feel good from using it, it's good for me anyway.
It sounds like the couple of stories that you've told, it was so important to have that camaraderie, to have that togetherness. And I mean, it almost sounds cliche, because those that are successful seem to be telling these very similar stories, but versus the maybe other environments that you've been in. Obviously, don't have to mention any names, but how important was it looking back and thinking we were successful, like the camaraderie was superb in South Africa with the guys, versus maybe others where we could have been so successful, but that was just missing because there was X or there was Y. So just to sum that up, that question, how important was it, that camaraderie and togetherness of the guys?
Massively important. We struck a good balance. But before then, you know, Rassie is the head coach. He actually stated very, very early on to the players that we were going to be together for 19 weeks, and more or less 19 weeks straight. Now, from that, we had a 3-week camp leading into the Rugby Championship, which means you're travelling to New Zealand, then travelling. We actually stayed in New Zealand, then went over to Argentina, and then back. 2 weeks later, we're flying out to Japan because we wanted to go out there early. So the camaraderie was going to be huge. And what he said was, this isn't a sacrifice. You know, if you think this is a sacrifice to be away from home for 19 weeks with a potential of winning a World Cup, then you've got everything wrong, because that's not really a sacrifice. But if you're not keen on it, just tell me now and we won't consider you. So that we almost had that kind of the verbal contract. There was a bond there immediately. And then with 19 weeks together, you have to find ways for guys to get along. And fortunately, you know, we had a training week where one day during the week, so typically on a Thursday, the boys would be off. And if their families had come out to Japan and everything, brilliant, they were able to relax with them. They were able to get away from rugby. And recovery was never directed on the day off. It was just a suggestion of, please remember these things for tomorrow. You know, and that was it. I wasn't going to go until the last week, or the last 2-3 weeks. I wasn't going to go and stand there and make sure the boys were doing whatever they needed to do in the pool for their pool recovery. If they didn't think it's important enough, you know, to do it at that stage of a tournament, then I haven't educated them well enough in those preceding weeks. But so we found ways where let the boys be. Let them be completely to enjoy their families or their mates, or their teammates or whatever. But with that, you know, the guys just got tight, you know, really tight as time went along, because it was a good group of humans. You know, there were really good players there. There wasn't one player, and you know, there's always one, isn't there? Or there's always one or two. There wasn't a player that you'd be like, oh, if I get stuck with him for 10 minutes, you know, it's going to do my head in. There wasn't one of those. So it was good. It was it was a nice group.
So was there any other challenges that came up from your time at South Africa that you overcame to obviously end in how it ended with winning the World Cup?
Not sure about challenges. No, they're really compliant group of people. You know, they're great humans, the South Africans, where you didn't necessarily have to educate on why we were doing certain things in training. It was much more important to get to know what they enjoy doing and what they really, really didn't like doing. So maybe one of the challenges was around the strength programming. You had some guys who really, really valued it. You'd have the cohort of players who'd want to do bench, squat, chin every single week. So that's what they got. But then you had the challenge of some of the older players. Some of them had been playing in Europe, playing in France. They hated the gym. So then it was come on, let's get one session done a week. Let's go after what you have to do, what your real priority is. And that's where I suppose it's the challenge of becoming creative and maybe using some of the Bosch type exercises with those guys. Not because they're the right exercises. I think they are to an extent. But that guy just doesn't want to have a bar on his back. And, it goes back then to the main thing. So if you're taking energy away from him by forcing him to squat, well then, you're going to lose him in other areas. So that was probably the challenge, to get to know the players, who needed what, who wanted what, and then how do you best serve it to make sure that it's still in line with the program, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. How difficult is that when, I know you said you've got the guys who are dead keen, bench, chin, squat, but then looking over and seeing someone else maybe not doing it, and I suppose that's got to be a special group for them players in the first group to not question what's going on with everyone else. Like, I'm pulling my weight here, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Like, he's not doing this, or I can imagine in the wrong type of environment, finger pointing starts there.
Oh, completely. And I'm not saying for a second you could do that in many environments, but there, when I'd sit down with that player on a Sunday evening, or when we've arrived, or if it's on a flight, and let's just go through your program. Are you happy? Are you happy with this? Are you happy? Are you good with that? Or do you want to change that? Or would you prefer this? They all have their say in their program. You've got them engaged in what they need to do, so they don't really give a shit about what the other guy's doing. And part of it as well, you had some players, and I won't mention them, but you go, geez, some of the boys go, God, you did well to get him to do that now, didn't you? Or, we got to the point where if there were optional strength sessions and you had guys turning up, they'd be like, geez, I can't believe he turned up, So there's a bit of peer pressure about it as well, but I wouldn't really stress too much about that. It was just making sure that, does the guy who wants to lift, does he enjoy his session? Does he feel like he's getting what he needs? And does it, like I said, is it in line with the objectives? Yes. Well then, where's the problem? And if it means, if that happened, and you go, hey, just look after yourself, kind of thing, don't worry about him, that's it then.
That was an environment, clearly an incredible environment, and incredible players that went on to do what they did. But because there are plenty of coaches out there who are not in that kind of environment and are thinking, oh, is everything too structured in my sessions? Am I too harsh on these guys? Maybe they don't like X, Y, or Z, but I'm getting them to do it because I think it's the right thing to do. Are there other environments that you've worked in maybe now where you have to be a little bit tighter because them players aren't as good or aren't as self-motivated as the guys that you worked with in South Africa?
Yeah, totally. And I hope it doesn't come across as that I'm not consistent in
No,
this.
No, not at all.
What's really important is you appreciate the group of players you've got. And in South Africans, you've got massive humans, massively strong humans that might not necessarily be gym strong, but some of the guys, you'd have a backline player who's 110 kilos who grew up on a farm. So if it came to a wrestle between him and a guy who could bench 180, there's probably the guy who's been on the farm who's going to win that. So it's appreciating that. Now, when you've got that kind of size and innate power in humans, fitness was going to be the thing that there was no question. When they didn't want to do that, there was no choice. That was the area that we had to. That was the gap. That was the gap for that team, for that group. So that's where we went unbelievably hard. But yeah, so when it came to strength, now you have to appreciate new environments. So whatever environment you go in, what's the biggest gap? And that's probably what I addressed immediately, or had to lean on people to guide me on, okay, where are we lacking at Leicester Tigers? What do we need to address first? What's the biggest impact on performance going to be? So what do we have to prioritize? So yeah, I think that would be the way that I'd look at that. And it was literally just an order of priorities.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive into the conditionality, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Again, seeing that as the biggest gap for these guys, how did you plug that gap? And what was obviously the end goal was the World Cup and to win. So kind of working back from there, what were the stages that you went through to get them prepared to be able to do that?
So 2018 was brilliant to give information on what the demands of international rugby was for South Africa. As many of your guests have spoken about training for the demands of the game. Yeah, we have to address what are the worst case scenarios. We have to address what the peak game demands are, everything like that, and that has to form part of the planning. However, we have to also address, number one, what are our main weapons as the Springboks at the time? So if set piece, if the maul and our defence were going to be weapons for us in the Rugby Championship and the World Cup, how do we make sure that they remain our weapons under fatigue? So we had to become unbelievably fit to make sure that we don't drop off in those areas. So that formed a lot of how we trained. So, for example, in terms of our defence, there was a real aggressive defence line. So what did that mean? It meant that the big boys had to get off the ground quickly. Then we had to get into space, so we had to get the width unbelievably quickly. So our lateral ability was imperative. Then we had to get off the line unbelievably hard as well. So how we accelerated and how we could do that in a repeated manner was massively important. So that's what we trained towards. Then the second one was, if we're going to train the demands of the game, you have to think about what the demands of the opposition are as well. So it would be negligent to train only for the strengths of South Africa. Similarly here, we can't train for just the strengths of what we want and our style of play at Leicester Tigers. We have to train to be able to combat the best teams in the Premiership. So if we're going to go up now against Exeter at the weekend, what do we need that's going to mean that we can get into a position to beat Exeter? And if that doesn't happen now, well, we have to be there next season, or we have to be there the following season. So that's really the goal. And you go, so it's not just you. You have to be able to train. So we were mindful of, if we are going to beat New Zealand, or if we're going to beat England or Wales, because that's who we'd anticipate would be in the latter stages of the tournament, what do we need to be able to do? So that has to form how you plan your training. So it's not just about you.
Let's just dive into two of them things that you mentioned there. So acceleration, getting off the line quick, and getting the big guys off the floor. Is there any examples that you can give how you developed sessions around them aspects? Because they were clearly key, because you've just mentioned them. And by the way, I'm no rugby expert, so 100% not. But you've mentioned them too, so they're clearly important. Is there anything any examples you can give us that shows how you went about that?
Yeah, well, I suppose the example for the second part, for defence and our line speed, came down to the importance of training the game in your training week. Rather than getting good at drills, can you actually stress the players in and around? And you've had experts like Eddie speak on your podcast before. How can we mimic the stresses of the game in training and overload that? So we're very, very lucky. Like I said, he's probably one of the best coaches I've come across, Jacques Nienaber, the defence coach, who's now the head coach. In every training session, he demands, line speed. So no drill or no aspect of training would take place without that being stressed, because that is probably one of the most important aspects. So that was done all the time, so you get that. But if we trained 3 times a week, there'd always be elements of acceleration mechanics or stressing a form of acceleration or evasion agility at the start of every session, because that is something they just had to get good at. When I spoke about the lateral ability, you have to keep on feeding that in, because going back to what I said right at the start, if it's not actually going to impact performance, well, don't bother with it. But we knew that was, so we had to have a flavour of it, a flavour that was consistent through the week. And then getting guys off the floor, literally that. It's whatever you do that gets the players to land on the ground and get back on their feet quickly. Now, if that's done with a weight, if it's unweighted, if it's with the player resistance, if it's, whatever it is, if it's important, just find ways to do it. So there was nothing sexy to it, Rob. There were no great drills. It was literally right then, let's do something. And it's something as simple. I think I pinched this from John Pryor. I call it the deck square, where it's just a 4x4 square. And every time you get to a line, every time you get to a cone, it's just a down up. Then you work laterally, down up, back. You do that 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, 10 times. It's brutal, especially if you're 130 kilos. So it doesn't have to be pretty, but it has to be effective. And the player has to realize why it's important. So I think South Africa saw in the final, that the player's ability, when you're desperate in defence, you have to get off the ground. And if you don't, you're exposing your teammates. So we needed 14, 15 guys on their feet, for the majority of the time when we were defending.
How important was data in all this, in guiding what you were doing? Because you were the one-man band. Did you have the luxury of GPS to guide this? Okay.
Yeah.
So you were doing that as well?
Yes, yeah. But it was great.
Yeah.
What GPS did, what data did to guide us was from 2018 to give us what the worst case scenarios, the peak game demands were. So that informed our conditioning work. If we did any exclusive conditioning work for the guys, well, if they couldn't do what the peak game demands were by running a straight line, there's no way they're going to do it when there's the interference of actually playing a game. So that formed some of our work at the start. And also, when we were in camp, and I'm sure I'll have people argue this point, but I was able to, it wasn't too complex even for me, but work out what the biggest week was for us in 2018. So what was the biggest test week? And that, what I mean by that was, what was the biggest in terms of volume and intensity across a training and a game for every player, and then positional groups. So that became our 100% for 2019. So we had 3 camp weeks where we had to live above 100%. I didn't really believe that we needed to exceed it much more than that. So we got to probably about 115% on average for every player. We got there safely. And I just thought, well, if you can tolerate what's just above what you're going to do in your very, very hardest test week, you should be okay. Because we didn't want to lose the physicality as well. We didn't want to lose size. So we didn't want 130, 140% weeks, to be unbelievably running fit, but to be 10% lighter for each player, if that makes sense. Now, the only time I did shit myself, though, was when I was talking to the Japan...
Not
Simon
level
Jones.
3.
Oh, no, this was awful. We had a friendly with Japan just before the World Cup started. And I asked him, what kind of volumes would you do in a camp week? And I hope he's not listening to this now, so I'm not sharing. No, he's gone to the Highlanders now, so it's all right. He said they were covering, some of the positions were covering between 40 and 50 kilometres in a week. And I shat myself. And I thought, wow, we haven't done anything like that. But for our game, it was the right thing that we didn't even get anywhere close to that, But we just got them conditioned to do what they needed to do to be able to play our style and negate the opposition.
Did you share that amongst the staff? What you'd got, the info? Did you? Okay.
Afterwards.
Did they? Yeah, afterwards. Yes. I was going to say, do it at the time and everyone panics.
Exactly. But, GPS, though, with us and the way we worked as a coaching group, it was literally... I never really shared anything with the players. It was just their job was to train as hard as they could. Our job was to hold them back if needed. And so I shared very, very little. Only when we got to Japan and the heat and the humidity was such a factor that I wanted to highlight that we were still achieving exactly the same intensity as what we were back in South Africa. But the coaches just wanted to know, was it appropriate or was it not? Do we need to adapt tomorrow or don't we? And that was simply it. And I know different coaches, and there'll be challenges for different S&C coaches, sports scientists, because some coaches will want everything. But for that group, they just wanted to know, are we on track or are we not? And what do we need to do to change it? So from that point of view, it was great. It was a real simple, again, basic way of doing things, which I love.
Mm-hmm. one last thing I want to touch on. I think it's become quite a sexy thing to discuss, which is why I'll bring it in here, of course. And that's wrestling. It's become quite a thing to see on, especially on social media, and to talk about it and things. I mean, what part did that play in the conditioning of your guys, or does it now and back then?
Back then, no. We did very little, if no wrestling. Now some of the warm-ups might have started, for a physical session. We might have done an element of wrestling, but that was literally just a preparation for the session. And right now, no, we do contact work, but specific to areas of tackle entry, breakdown. So not the typical wrestling that some are doing. It just doesn't fit right now for us. We had no pre-season as well this year, like everyone else. So I don't think it's something that we actually need to do, because the level of contact the players get on a weekly basis is that high. I don't think we've got time to do it. Now, maybe in pre-season we might explore it next summer. And I'll definitely get on to someone like Ollie Richardson, because he's a bit of a guru in that area, isn't he? And that's something I wouldn't be good at. So maybe that's why we're not doing it as well, But I think what we're doing in terms of contact preparation is appropriate right now.
Mm-hmm. So would that be just because of the like you say, the pre-season situation, or would it be very much a style of play? Again, plugging the gaps that you've identified to prioritize your time.
Yeah, potentially, but also, laws have changed, interpretations have changed in some aspects of the contact area. So with that, the priority is for the players to understand that better, so to put them in scenarios regularly. So that's why I don't think we've got time. We don't have the luxury of time to do wrestling right now. But if we encountered players who are poor or very, very poor in certain aspects of contact, and it could be supported by doing aspects of wrestling, then we'll definitely investigate that. And I think then it makes complete sense to try and include something.
Cool. Well, I'm going to finish on one thing, because this fascinates me, and it's something that I spoke to with Bryce about, and it's something that I spoke to Dave Slemon about, who you know really well. And it's this influence of having various influences from working in various different parts of the world, very different cultures with different people. And I think it's something that I won't apologise to kind of bringing up when I have someone like yourself on who's got that multitude of experiences. How important do you think that is for a practitioner, not only in rugby, but in various, any sport, to have them various influences where you are the one-man band, you are in a team, you are leading a group, all them kind of things to create this rounded practitioner? How important do you think that is, and how important do you think that's been for you as an individual?
Yeah, I think that's been massively important for me. I've been very, very fortunate, when I started out with the Scarlets back in 2005, Mark Bennett was my line manager with the Welsh Rugby Union at the time. So he was unbelievably good from the strength, power, speed, side of things. And then Wayne Proctor, who works for World Rugby, he was with Namibia in the World Cup, a former player, former international. He was the Scarlet head S&C, and he was a real, fitness, endurance, guy. So I was able to learn from the two ends of the spectrum immediately there. Then I ended up going out to New Zealand, to Australia, and working with Dean Benton, and Dean runs a program, and I was way out of my depth there. There were conversations I had with Dean. I don't mind saying it now. I'd have been too nervous to say it to his face at the time, but he was talking to me, and I was thinking, I have no idea what you're saying to me, Dean, but it sounds fucking good. Excuse me, sorry. It sounds really good. And then on the way back from Australia, meeting guys like Adam Beard, Franz Bosch was in with Wales at the time, and then guys in Ireland, Jason Cowman, Nick Winkelman's obviously there. The guys who were at Munster at the time, like Bryce was there when I started. Guys like Aidan O'Connell, PJ Wilson, Adam Sheehan. you've got this wealth of knowledge around you, and it's just about trying to extract not just what you want to hear, but what is better. And then obviously going out to South Africa, and that's one of the massive benefits of being in an international role, is on match day you get to meet guys like Stuart Ewell, who I'd come across, at Glasgow, Tom Tombleson, those kind of guys, John Clark with England. But then also travelling around in South Africa, you get to meet the S&C coaches at every franchise, and everyone's got something. There's never a bad day to get something. And if it's just one thing, or if it's 10 things, it's going to influence how you do things again. And it might just be the manner of the coaching. You go, wow, how did he get that group engaged so quickly? So yeah, very, very long-winded answer, but I think it's essential, and I touched on it briefly, but sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, and I asked someone like Dave Sleman for advice on this as well. Who do I go and pick the brains of? Someone who's completely different from me, because I know I'd be guilty of wanting to go and talk to someone who has a similar philosophy, but it's really uncomfortable to go and talk to someone who you don't disagree with, be like, I have no idea why he does this. So yeah, very, very long-winded way of saying, yeah, and I think it's definitely shaped me, and what excites me is I'm still meeting guys, there's guys at Leicester, you got guys like Matt Parr, James Nolan, you got James Whitfield, all these boys who bring something completely different again, and it's a different way that I did things at South Africa, but I'm appreciating the different ways, so so it's brilliant. I think it's massively important.
Amazing.
That was long.
Well, thank you very much. No, that's great. It's something that I'm really passionate about sharing. I think, like I said during the question, it's when I have someone like you on, it's great to, I suppose, feed my own bias to think that this is it's great to have all these different experiences. I think it's easy to pigeonhole yourself or stay in a comfortable environment for too long when getting to different countries. And I wish I'd done it earlier on and go work abroad and these kind of things. And yeah, I think it's super, super valuable. So good answer. Anyone that wants to pick your brain, Aled, and have a little chat about anything we've spoke about, where's the best place for people to contact you?
Well, I have to say I'm pretty poor on social media. But I'll check Twitter. So I'm not even sure. I think I'm just Aled Walters at Twitter. I'm on Instagram, but I only really take photos of sheep and wildlife and just random crap around the area. So I'm not too. I don't post anything about S&C or anything like that. But if anyone does want to get in touch, I'm also on LinkedIn as well. Anyway, so again, I don't know what my names are on those things, but
it's fine, mate.
Yeah,
I can link to them. So you're the official at Aled Walters. You got in there first.
Got in there first. They were gutted. The other three, they're gutted.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for coming on, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you once again, and really appreciate it. But we'll definitely keep in touch. And good luck at Leicester this season. But we'll speak soon.